Right, welcome back, grade 12s. I will try to go through this as fast as possible. I'll try and give you access to this document for your own research purpose. I'm not going to go through it very, word for word, but more so just skimming through most of the stuff, right? So this is compiled by myself and Avat, and this is the nature and future of human trafficking in South Africa. I found it to be a very interesting article. So it goes over these things: terms of reference, legislative framework, human trafficking in South Africa, broad overview, and what implications might be like for 2030 towards a disruption of current trends, and concluding remarks as well as his references. And I'll show you a good way to reference, using his method as well. Okay, so terms of reference here. So the author was requested to provide insights into the nature of future and human trafficking. So this is like why he wrote what he wrote and what he's going to tell us about, and which groups he will be speaking about as well, like such as he speaks of the Hawks, child protection and sexual offences units, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then some legislative framework, so different laws that he speaks of, and here he speaks of the international community in 1999 began to draft a protocol to prevent, surpass, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, also known as Palermo Protocol, which took into account that there was no universal instrument that addresses all aspects of trafficking in persons. So he speaks of this Palermo Protocol and what its main drive is. Okay, right, and so it came into effect basically this date and was subsequently ratified by South Africa this year. So South Africa was now bound to develop laws to protect victims of human trafficking. So they only came of laws to protect those of human trafficking in 2004. Before that, it was not seen as something. There was no need or legal push to have laws to protect people. So now there is, which we are grateful for. Right, so varied interpretations and ideological tensions. Ideological, think of idea. It's basically people's different ideas on how things should be. Okay, so obviously there was tensions around that. And understanding of what crime and human trafficking constitutes in South Africa, it becomes important to first reflect on the definition of it. And I agree. So what in terms of infers of the crime of human trafficking? To what extent? What different variations do you get of it as well? So it does take some introspection or reflection. The offence of trafficking in persons is defined by Section 4, Chapter 1, Section 4.1 in Chapter 2 of the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons. So PACO TIP Act 7 of 2013 is as follows. Any person who delivers, recruits, transports, transfers, harbors, sells, exchanges, leases, or receives another person within or across the borders of the Republic by means of a threat of harm. The threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, the abuse of vulnerability, fraud, deception, abduction, kidnapping, the abuse of power, the direct or indirect giving of receiving of payments. So this goes on and on to discuss the different variations of groups that are affected by this, right? And different people as well. In terms of child, a forced marriage is also one of them. Okay. Also important here is the definition of abuse of vulnerability, as deconstructed in Section 1 of the PACO TIP Act, as a means through which a person can be mobilized for subsequent exploitation. According to this definition, abuse of vulnerability for purposes of Section 4.1 means any abuse that leads to a person to believe that he or she has no reasonable alternative to submit to exploitation, and includes but is not limited to taking advantage of the vulnerable parties, that person resulting from the person having endangered or remained in the public illegally, pregnancy, disability. So going all the ways, people being a person is vulnerable. Okay, so these are all the ways in which someone can be considered a vulnerable individual and should not be taken advantage of. The aforementioned vulnerability considerations are reflective of the South African social context and features predominantly in numerous past and ongoing reports, investigations, and prosecutions of human trafficking in the country. So they have made it very specific based off what that they have seen. So based off what they have seen in the cases or the case law that they have been exposed to, right? So here, human trafficking in South Africa, broad overview. Human trafficking is by no means a recent phenomenon in South Africa and has shown to be an emergent property of the country's past and present deep and dense structural inequalities. From the onset of its ratification in the Palermo Protocol in 2004, South Africa has been identified as a source, transit, and destination for men, women, and children subjugated to forced labor and sex trafficking. In all of the U.S. TIP reports for the period 2004 and 2017, South Africa has been assigned a Tier 2 ranking in 2004 in the annual U.S. TIP report, regressed to a Tier 2 watch list ranking between 2005 and 2018, and again improved to a Tier 2 ranking in 2009 to 2017. Currently, the South African government does not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking and fell short in several key areas, but are making significant efforts to do so. So although they are short, yes, they are making significant efforts to do so, and it is our job as responsible and active citizens to make sure that their job is being done as effectively as possible in the correct sort of time frame. Okay, so here they speak of human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation is not the most documented type of trafficking, but both locally and internationally, but also saturated with ideological tensions between abolitionist and preservationist positions on the nature of prostitution and human trafficking in South Africa. So there is different levels of exploitation as well. So those that adopt an abolitionist stance have often been accused of sensationalizing the issue of human trafficking for sexual exploitation, exaggerating and fueling moral panic. So those that are trying to get rid of it, remember, it is good to sort of fight against this, but that doesn't mean you must go and attack everyone. Have you heard of human trafficking? Do you know of human trafficking? We want the public to be more aware, but we don't want to force them into this awareness, because then we ourselves will be the same as the perpetrators. We are exploiting and using others that are, don't need to hear it in such a way. We can just inform them humbly about it. Yes, it is a big problem, and I'm not saying that we should sort of lax on our sort of informing the public, but we should not overburden them and become the enemy in order to fight them. We're not trying to fight fire with fire. We are trying to be the calm that comes after the storm and create identifiable ways forward, right? And this project is one of those, to get you, the youth, and the future of this country more involved, better equipped, better informed to deal with all of these sort of things that are here, right? So despite criticism leveled against these South African studies, they continue to be used to support of sex work documentation. So they're just speaking about here how South Africa sort of deals with it, and I'll try and get this document to you so that you can go through it more introspectively. It is 18 pages, and I'm not going to read through it because you will have it, but I want to go through the key elements that it discusses. Communities across South Africa have ventilated much frustration and anger about the prevalence and intersection of drugs, prostitution, human trafficking, and a variety of criminal activities. Examples include incidents of public violence in Rosettenville, Mamelodi, Rustenburg, and more recently Krugersdorp. International syndicates involving Nigerian, Thai. So here they speak of the people getting sort of fed up with all of the people that they've identified as part of the country in these areas that have been taking part in different crimes or criminal activity, such as mentioned before. And then the extent and multi-layered realities of labor trafficking, illicit mining, exploitative farm labor, and domestic servitude in South Africa remains largely unexplored. So here they speak of these areas that aren't really seen. We see human trafficking in this broad veil, but there is different elements of it. It's not just human trafficking for sex work, but there's also labor trafficking. So that is like another form of slavery, and these are different things that you can unpack in your research if you want to go into this topic. And you don't have to touch on all of them. You can give examples of all of them here, and for like concise sake, go through two of them. For instance, labor trafficking and illicit mining. Mining is a very big thing in South Africa, specifically in Johannesburg. So it's a great deal that you can speak on this topic. So just moving on from this, it goes into all the different explanations. Yeah, again, I'll try and get this document to you so you'll have it. But you cannot only use this document. Use this document as a platform that will lead you to other pebbles that you could step on. Okay. So one of the most pressing questions that continues to plague practitioners, researchers, and policymakers is how big is the problem? As a hidden and subversive crime, human trafficking does not lend itself to be quantitative, and therefore the quest for reliable statistics will remain an elusive statistical nightmare. So we will never really know how big this problem is, because there is a lot of people protecting it and hiding it, right? So we could maybe start different campaigns to act out, to speak out, right? And they speak of different NGO communities that speak of this as well, and the ideal conditions to make this crime as it is, right? So I will go through in the next part speculation or implications for the future, right? So now that we've unpacked it, I'll go through in the next part, what does it mean for the future?